Welcome back to Dave's Gone By on AM 1240 WGBB in Freeport, New York, and live streaming on the web at am1240wgbb.com. And it's time for Dave's Got Guests, and I've got a really, really special guest this evening because, I have a lot of musical guests on the show, and I've had some pretty amazing and fairly major people, everyone from Tom Paxton to Neil Sedaka, to the lovely band October Project. And tonight, I'm going to stay in that kind of idiom of folk and blues with one of the real masters of that genre, and someone who has been in the music business, not just on the periphery, but in and around it for about 4 decades now, and has really been at his best for the last 10 to 15 years, where he really made a big comeback into the industry, and we'll hear all about that, plus we'll be hearing a bit of his music as well. So please welcome to the Daverhood, Chris Smither.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
Pretty well.
So, and one of the reasons also that we're playing this tonight is that you're doing a gig at Joe's Pub on January 7th.
Correct.
And you'll be playing stuff, obviously, from all your career and covers, but also from your recent album, which is called Train Home.
Correct.
And as I was saying, the past few years have been, in some ways, the most fruitful and the best for you, musically, even though you've been at this since, like, the early 60s, from literally when folks like Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary and Dave Van Ronk were at it.
That's right.
You were too. So again, why don't we just take it from the beginnings? And the fact that you were born in 1944 and a very itinerant childhood.
Yes, quite. I think, a lot of people had itinerant childhoods when being born during the war. And, I was born in Miami, and that was strictly a matter of convenience because my father happened to be stationed there at the time. And I don't think we stayed there more than 6 or 7 months. And then we went to Ecuador. And then I think Texas, and then and then actually New Orleans became home. We went a lot of places out of New Orleans, but we always returned there, and that was actually my home until I was in my early 20s. So
I assume that also had an influence on you musically, as well as just the whole style and feel of New Orleans.
I think it did, although, to tell you the truth, I didn't identify that much. I was always looking elsewhere. It's kind of a fairly common symptom of not being able to see what's right in front of you, and the grass is always greener. But, it was after I left New Orleans that people started pointing out how much I'd absorbed from that whole culture without even really realizing it. My whole sense of rhythm, the way I keep time is very New Orleans. It's almost like a backwards timekeeping phenomenon that is really apparent in New Orleans-style drumming, but it's something that comes very naturally to me.
Can you describe it a little more? First of all, did you say backwoods or backwards?
Backwards.
Backwards. What does that mean? For instance, often the kick drum will be on the 2 and the 4 instead of on the 1 and the 3. Okay.
It's often turned around, and people will watch the way I tap my feet, and they can't understand why my heel comes down when it does. But it's something that's totally unconscious to me. I'm not really aware of, the intricacies of I just do it the way I feel it, and it became apparent to me much later that was where that feel came from. Well,
I was going to ask about this later, but since we're already into this, you very specifically, I don't know if you do this at every concert, but there was a point there when you told the story in one of your interviews that you go and warm up for a show, and then you do the show, and then it won't work out too well. And then you discovered something about your feet.
Yeah, I had to hear them. If there was carpeting on the stage, nothing was right. Nothing would work out. And not only did I have to hear my feet, but the audience had to hear my feet. One of the best things that my current management did for me was point that out and say, let's try miking them, because I want to get that out there. And we did it, and it was a revelation to me. No single thing has changed my performance and just the way I feel on stage.
but the fact that your feet are microphones.
And the fact, yes, exactly right.
So it almost is like two instruments going at the same time. You have a one-man band because you've got percussion.
Well, there's a percussion aspect to it as well. Yeah.
Now, obviously, the first instrument that you had was not a shoe. Well,
No.
but it was a ukulele.
Yeah, right. I thought it was a guitar because I was very young, and of course, I was small enough, and the ukulele seemed big enough. But it was, that's what really started me on it. I had an uncle that showed me 3 chords, and I was off and running. And my dad was so impressed that he got me a guitar when he realized that I wasn't going to put it down after a couple of weeks, the way I did everything else. And so he actually found something that I would stay interested in, and I've played guitar ever since.
Now, actually, when was that?
I was 11.
Oh, it was relatively old-ish. You know, it wasn't like it was you were 4 years old. So you were you were 11, and
I was 9 when I got the ukulele. I was 11 when I got the guitar.
And then the next stepping stone of the career had to do with hearing Mississippi John Hurt.
That's right. Well, actually, though, the first one was Lightnin' Hopkins.
Oh, okay. Tell me.
Lightnin' Hopkins, I was introduced to Lightnin' Hopkins in my freshman year of college. I had already been, I had been introduced to Joan Baez, and I was into a lot of folk stuff, and of course the Kingston Trio, and a bunch of other stuff. But when I first heard Lightnin' Hopkins, a roommate of mine played it for me. He was from Texas. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought there were 2 or 3 people playing, and it was only one guy on one guitar. And the reason I loved it so much was that to me it sounded like rock and roll, which was my first love.
Oh, okay.
And so here's this guy with this obvious rhythmic component that sounds so rock and roll to me, only he was doing it all by himself, and I was just enraptured with that. And that's what turned me on to start looking for more blues guys.
Well,
that's how I found Mississippi John Hurt.
And you went to hear him, and you were actually on your way. You were in Paris for a year, and or heading off there,
right?
To on a college. What was that, an exchange program kind of thing?
Yeah, that was a junior year abroad program.
But after hearing Hurt and I guess Lightnin' Hopkins do blues, you figured college just wasn't doing it for you?
Well, I kept trying. I put in 4 years of effort, but I never got the degree.
Did you get to stay in Paris all 4 years? I would understand that.
No, I went to Paris for a year. My freshman year, I went to Mexico City. Then I transferred back to Tulane, and I was in New Orleans for a year. And then I went to Paris for a year, and then I came back to New Orleans for a year. But by that time, I was done with college. All I wanted to do was play the guitar, and so that was when I left. I left home a year later and came up to the Northeast, and started trying to do what I do now.
Why did you, as so many people did at that point, even though rock and roll was your first love, did you go for folk and folk blues as opposed to starting a rock band?
Well, because I couldn't get along with anybody in the band. I always conceived of it as a solo effort. One of the things that I loved about Lightnin' Hopkins was that he was making this beautiful rhythmic sound without being in a band. And I just thought, well, man, if I can do that, then I was starting to get into Dylan as well. Now, Dylan is very interesting because, there's a lot of parallels there, because when you listen to him, in the early days, he was doing blues. He was doing acoustic blues, and then he started to write a lot more of his material. Finally, he started writing all of his own material, and to this day, he sounds the same. But you wouldn't think of calling him a blues artist, and yet the elements of it are all there. You can hear who he listened to in the beginning, and it's very much the same way that I approached it. Because then I really got into songwriting, and of course, the kinds of rhythms and the kinds of harmonic rhythms that I was into were the blues things, and so it came out sounding the way I sound.
And I guess I have to ask this question of everybody who was around from that era. Have you ever met Bob Dylan?
No, I've never met Bob Dylan. I've only ever seen him play once.
Oh, wow.
Ever.
But was it in the old days, or was it like at Madison Square Garden in 1980-something?
No, it was about 1991. And I was supposed to open for him in Florida. And I was I was very excited about it, and I was supposed to open for him in Tampa, and apparently the night before in Tallahassee, somebody had opened for him and done just this absolutely wretched job, and so he sent out this notice saying that he didn't want any more solo opening acts, and that was me the next night, so they canceled me.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
How can they do that?
Well...
Or they just pay you your fee, but
they paid me the fee, but I didn't get to play. And they replaced me with a duo.
Yeah.
That I was, of course, I was in no mood to appreciate what they were doing. I didn't think they were very good. But
two guys named Simon and Gar something.
No, I never heard of them before or since. But I stuck around and listened to the show.
Man.
That's the one time I've ever seen Bob Dylan perform.
But there are some other people that. One of the interesting things is that you've opened for some amazing people, and a couple of amazing people since you've been in the industry for so long have opened for you.
That's right.
Over the years. Now the folks that you've opened for include Ian and Sylvia and Joni Mitchell.
Right.
Do you have any Joni Mitchell stories or memories or anything like that?
Just that it was, it was a 4 or a 5 day stint at a place called the Main Point, just outside of Philadelphia, and I absolutely loved it. It was a wonderful, wonderful weekend. For one thing, she filled up every show, so I got a lot of exposure. And she was very nice. I got along with her fine. It was long before she was very famous, at least in my life then, but not nearly as famous as she would become. And she was, I just thought she was very approachable. I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, cool. And some of the other folks that you open for include who? Like,
Did I open for the Byrds?
Oh my gosh. Did you ever trade guitar licks with Roger McGuinn or?
Yeah.
Cool.
And I opened for the Byrds, I opened for Van Morrison, I opened for a lot of sort of psychedelic rock and roll bands.
Oh, because I keep thinking of you in terms of the last 15 years and not the fact that you were out there in the late 60s and 70s. But any stories about Van Morrison, let's say?
Not really.
Yeah.
He thanked me very nicely, when I came off stage, and he said and told me that he hadn't had a chance to hear any of the songs, but he could tell by the way the audience was responding that it had gone very well, and he was very pleased for me.
Well, considering the way Van Morrison can be sometimes, that was nice enough for him to do.
Yeah. And then I opened for one of the worst shows I ever had was opening at Symphony Hall in Boston for Roberta Flack.
Now, what went wrong?
I think I was probably the only white guy in the audience in the whole place. It was terrible. People were booing me. They said, "Get off the stage."
You should have said, "But I'm Donny Hathaway."
Yeah, right. Well, what I said, "Listen, let me tell you all something. I'm supposed to sit up here and play for 30 minutes, and they're paying me what seems to me to be a god-awful amount of money, and I am not going to leave before I've earned it." And everybody clapped. That was the biggest hand I got all night.
Oh, dear. But now, again, to reverse the question, though, there are folks who opened for you over the years. Now, who are some of those people?
Well, Bonnie Raitt started opening for me, and Jackson Browne.
Wow.
Tom Waits.
I did want to ask about that. There must have been some wild Tom Waits stories. But
I thought he was just almost one of the most outrageous people I'd ever met, and I absolutely loved him. And he opened for me about 3 different places, again at the Main Point, the same place that I'd opened for Joni Mitchell. He opened for me at a place called the Cellar Door in Washington, D.C., and there was one other one, and I can't remember where it was.
But do you remember any specific things he said or did, or that you guys did together? Did you hang out? Or?
Not really. We just sat around and talked. It was basically, a long time ago, a lot of drinking going on. Right. Which is a big difference between the way things are now. There's a lot more drugs and drinking than there are now. But, I remember just thinking to myself, this guy's got it. Something's going to happen with this guy. It was just too good to be believed.
So whatever did become of him?
Tom Waits? Yeah. I think he's had a couple of mega-selling records.
Yeah. Or even if he didn't, he's probably one of the most important artists we have. Yeah. Let me ask another person of that era who was really instrumental for you, and now we're turning the clock back a bit. Someone who's mentioned on Bob Dylan's second album, I believe,
right.
Rick Von Schmidt.
That's right.
Whom I used to confuse with Dave Von Ronk, who is...
Yes, a lot of people did.
Different people. Well, the Von thing throws people. But what happened? How did you meet him, and how did you hook up, and how did...
He was one of the first people in music that I ever met, and I did it very... a friend of mine in college was from Sarasota, Florida, and he told me, this guy Eric Von Schmidt lives in Sarasota. He's not very far from my house. And I said, you're kidding me. And he said, yeah, you ever heard of him? And I said, well, yeah, because I had a couple of records by him, and I had there was an Elektra album of, a whole collection of urban folk revivalists, urban blues revivalists, that he had done the cover for as well as being on the record itself. So I went to Sarasota with this friend of mine, and I just called him up, and he invited me over to his house. He said, oh, come on over. There's a whole bunch of people over here. So I went over, and there was a raft of people, including about half the members of Jim Kruskin's Jug Band.
Wow.
And so I was in heaven. I was starstruck. I just sat there with my mouth open. But, I made some friends. I became good friends with Eric, so... And he was the one that suggested that I go up to the Northeast. He said it very casually, but I took it as a command from God. So I went.
But that is a little surprising. I mean, you figure that New Orleans and that area would have been a hotbed for music, or Nashville, let's say, since we were doing country and folk. But no, they were saying no, go up to New York, go up to Philly, go up to Massachusetts.
That's where all the songwriters were happening. It was in New York and Boston.
And
that was before the huge exodus to the West Coast had even started.
Do you remember the first song that you wrote?
Yeah. The very first song that I ever wrote was called Braden River.
Wade in the River?
No, Braden River, Braden.
Is that a river
It's a river in Florida, not far from where I was hanging out with Von Schmidt. And then I remember the second one, and I remember the third one.
Okay, what were they?
The second one was called Devil Got Your Man.
Uh-huh.
The third one was called Homunculus.
I read somewhere in one of the interviews or a piece about you that it expressed a certain kind of philosophy that you had.
Well, it's a very philosophical song. It was the first of what was to become quite a collection of songs that are kind of meditative and philosophically based. But it's also the name of my publishing company.
Oh, okay.
Homunculus Music.
Your first two records are actually released on a single CD, which is kind of neat. I don't have it with me at the station, but...
Right.
And then you had, 3 albums in the 1970s, in the early 1970s. And the weird thing about your career is that from about 1974 until 85, almost, nothing, or at least nothing on disc.
Nothing on disc. No, it was a whole collection, a whole combination of things, including... being dropped by the record company, and everything, the whole record business and music business was in flux, and nobody was really listening to folkies anymore. It seemed that way to me. Plus, I was drinking myself to death, and that had more to do with it than anything else. And and I didn't get out of that until about 85. So.
Why did you start drinking?
Oh, I started drinking from the time I was 14.
Just because it was all around, or?
Oh yeah, that's just what people did.
Well, people
all
also
my heroes did too.
Yeah. But they were also doing drugs. You didn't get into that.
No. I don't know. The reason I did do drugs, the drug was alcohol. I did a lot of other drugs, too, but the one that got me in trouble was alcohol. But, I don't know. Why does anybody start doing drugs? Alcohol is just another drug. But it's...
Well, were you unhappy? It seemed like you had no reason to be... Oh, okay.
I was wretched.
Why were you unhappy?
Because I was drinking.
Okay. So why did it take 10 years, and what happened in the 1980s that woke you up, as it were?
Oh, I just got tired of being, such a mess. Life was miserable, and so it was a question of, am I going to die like this, or am I going to get better? And I got better. It's a hard thing to explain. We could spend 3 or 4 hours talking about how you get out of, addictive drugs, but it's... at some point, something turns the switch, and you say, I got to get out of this somehow, and you do.
Had you been performing during those 10 years?
Yeah.
So you were still acting, you just didn't record anything, but you were out there doing concerts and touring. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't writing very much, but I was out there performing.
Well, I'm just trying to think. Do you remember? Was there a pinpoint night or moment when you said, "Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and start fresh," as it were?
No, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay. All right. Yes. But then it really started. I mean, it was obviously the wisest decision you ever made, because within a year you've gone. That was it on Flying Fish Records, or you got a label. Which one was it? Which record?
It was Flying Fish. Yeah. Well, actually, I did one little record with Gene Rosenthal out of Silver Spring, Maryland. And then the next record I did was a live record for Flying Fish, and at the same time I hooked up with some management that was, really quite helpful, very good, and really understood the sort of things that needed to be done. And at that point in my career, I was perfectly willing to do anything that anybody told me to do. Right. And it's a relationship that continues, to this day. It's been very good. It hasn't been a skyrocketing career, but it's been a steady climb up, for the last 15, 16 years.
It really has. I mean, everybody has to say, if they're in any kind of career, things are going well, and I'm really proud of the new record, and I'm proud of. But you can really, really say that. I mean, just from listening to the canon of albums over the past, from everywhere from Up on the Lowdown, Small Revelations, Drive You Home Again, which is one of my favorites, and then the recent one, of course, Train Home.
Right.
The process of writing songs, is it different when you're clean and sober than when you're unclean and
Well, for one thing,
I guess,
in my present state, I actually write.
Okay, yeah.
Writing continues to be the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. It's a struggle, and I guess the biggest difference between now and the early days of writing songs is that now I sort of have an inner conviction that it will get done. And I used to feel like I'll never get another one. I'd finish one song and I'd say, that's it. I don't think there's anything more. And now I know that if I apply myself and just, sometimes it's a question of just waiting it out, but if I exercise a minimum amount of discipline and just work at it, then eventually the songs will happen.
Well, you did, in another interview, mention something interesting about lyrics, which were, for a period in the 1960s, kind of sacrosanct. It was like, it's about the lyrics, and they're so meaningful, and they're so powerful, and it's all about that in Bob Dylan, and it's about what Paul Simon is writing. But you have a kind of a different take on lyrics.
Well, they just happen. I like to. They don't just happen. That's not true. It's hard to explain. I still think, in a way, that out of what I do, the three things that I do, which is sing, play guitar, and write lyrics, that the writing is probably the best thing I do the best.
Okay. I mean, there are people who think you're a pretty dandy guitar player, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that they think that, and I don't think I'm a bad guitar player. I just think that if I had to pick, personally, if I had to pick one of the three things that I do, I think I do the best, it would be
the writing of them.
It would be writing, but I'm just I'm a word person. The songs tend to say something, then they get.
But as you said, it's the combination of the words and the music. It's you mentioned Honky Tonk Woman is an example of a song that just does not read. But when you hear it, you don't even understand half the damn lyrics. But it's like, boom, that song says it.
That is true. I mean, I on the one hand, that's what I love about songs, is that you can actually do that with songs. But on the other hand, I do like lyrics that you can read.
Okay. Cool.
I like them. I have about 3 songs that don't read very well and that I think are wonderful songs.
What are they?
Well, one of them is called Link a Chain.
Okay.
And I defy anybody to make any sense out of that. It does make some kind of a sense, but it's not one of my more coherent utterances. And then I have one on Train Home called Confirmation that's just sort of silly.
Okay.
It makes you laugh in a way, but if you had to be pin down and explain what it meant, you might have kind of a hard time. I have a hard time myself with it. Hi, this is Chris Smither, and you're listening to Dave's Gone By on WGBB AM 1240.
Do you have a favorite song of yours?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No. The favorite one is often the one I wrote last, just because it's new. But...
Well, come to think of it, your last album, Train Home, is dated 2003,
right.
And here we are, and it's 2005.
Yes.
So does that mean you've got another handful of...
Oh, they're coming. They're coming. Most of them are still embryonic, but they're they're shaping up. I'll be playing at least one, maybe two or three new ones at Joe's Pub.
Oh, excellent. Let me ask you, one of the things about Train Home is that there are a couple of cover versions on there. Have you gotten into that recently more of doing other people's songs?
No, I've always done two or three.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, and then I often throw in a traditional blues, thing as well. But I've done covers all my life.
And who are the folks that you listen to in this day and age? What artists? What groups?
One of my favorites, and I have to go out and get his new record too. But Martin Knopfler.
Oh, okay.
I think Martin Knopfler is one of the most interesting guys around.
Okay.
He's a closet folkie. Everybody thinks of him as a big rock and roll star, but he's just a great songwriter, and he really finds interesting things to write about. He does a lot of seems like almost every record he does has a historical ballad on it that just really sends me. I love and plus he's just a fabulous guitar player.
Well, yeah. I mean, did you pick up anything from the way? What guitarists influence the way that your style, or does it all go back to Lightning Hopkins?
It all goes back to John Hurt and Lightning Hopkins, really. But there are. I mean, Martin Knopfler for one. Just the way he can sustain notes above while he keeps playing. I don't know. He sounds like two or three people at once sometimes.
But you've also mentioned that your style of playing evolved over the years. That it's gotten simpler in a way.
I think it has. To a degree. Well. I've finally learned, it took me a long time to learn how to play slowly.
What does that, why?
Because the spaces are just as important as the notes.
Okay. And so it was just a conscious effort to slow it down and play less?
I don't think it was so conscious. It's just, I suddenly realized, that I could compare, one record to the next and see that it was, there was a more measured pace to it, and at my best, I think that's better, because when you're young, you tend to be frenetic. I always admire a young player who can play slow stuff, because it's contrary to what your hormones are telling you.
And it's also sort of like what they used to say about when Neil Young, who is still in his heyday, but when he was in the early heyday, and he would do a guitar solo, and it was like, well, you're just playing the same note, but it's the right note. Now, you mentioned before in sort of a joking way that the reason you didn't get into rock and roll was it was kind of difficult for you to do stuff with bands, and you still don't. You still generally tour, just you and a guitar.
Right.
There's never been that sort of desire to go out with even a trio or something?
I did a few things with a trio with two other people at the beginning, in the early days when this last record came out, because I just loved working with him. With Peter Mulvey was playing some guitar with me, and then David Goodrich, who produced that record, came out and did quite a few songs quite a few dates with me.
Oh, that's cool.
I loved that. I really did. But basically the songs are conceived as solo pieces. So that's still where the emphasis is. At some point, you'll probably see me again with those guys. It wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
But, on the whole, it's just basically just me.
The one thing I didn't really get to ask is sort of the personal side of things. I don't know if you're a family person, have a wife, have kids, have pets, have none of that?
Oh, I know. I have a wife.
Oh, okay, cool.
I do. A really good one.
Well, that's good. Well, yeah, so do I. That's nice. Yeah. How, again, there's the typical musician question. How do you cope with a marriage when tonight or tomorrow night you're at Joe's Pub, and then the night after that you're somewhere else, and then 3 weeks from now you're in London?
Well, one answer is that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and the other one is that, I married my manager.
Oh.
And we'd already been working together for about 3 or 4 years by that time, and so it's not like she didn't know what she was getting into.
That begs the other question then. What happens when you have a falling out? I mean, the business is always sacrosanct, and you just...
we just learned how to keep it all separate, When we're talking business, then you put on the other hat. When it's personal, you put on your personal hat.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess to sort of round out the interview, I'm trying to figure out where you see your career going in the next 10 to 20 odd years. What you hope to happen and
I don't really know. I just turned 60, so it's
Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Thank you. It's getting and the touring gets harder. It does. I don't know how long I can keep it up. Probably for another 10 years, and in those 10 years, I would expect to see at least 3 or 4 more records.
Knock wood, yeah.
And we'll just see what happens.
And you want to be remembered in a way as a writer / with writer first, player, musician kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I try not to think about being remembered. I just want people to enjoy me now.
And people can enjoy him at Joe's Pub. This is Chris Smither, of course, on tomorrow night, January 7th. Right. And then you're not coming back into the New York, at least, until September, I think.
Oh, that seems like a long time.
Well, at least maybe there'll be in-between things, but on your website, I think the next nearest thing...
Oh, well, that's just the stuff that's booked so far. It tends to fill in a little bit.
Do you have a one memory of a concert that was just supreme, a moment where everything worked and it was like, this is what it's all about?
You know what? There's been a lot of them.
Good.
There have been a lot of them. But I remember one in particular. I was playing in Canada at the Winnipeg Festival, and I was really out of sorts. I was mad about the way this whole thing had been staged. And everybody on stage was mad about it because nobody wanted to do this in the round thing. Everybody would have much rather played 20 or 30 minutes by themselves.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself and coming to this realization that it didn't matter how I felt. That the important thing was just to do the song. Because the fact is that it wasn't about me. That's not what it's about. It's about the music. And if I do the music right, then in some respects it will become about me, but that's not primary. And I've never forgotten that, and it's really helped me a lot.
Well, it is about the music with the wonderful Chris Smither. Chris, I just want to thank you so much for joining us on the Daverhood and for your music. Please, everybody, go out and get Train Home, not to mention all the other Chris Smither. There are 11 of them, I believe, 11 albums out. Can they get them, aside from the usual Amazon and record stores? You've got a website as well.
Oh, yeah, Smither.com.
It's ChrisSmither.com. And great. Again, thank you very, very much. I wish you a Happy New Year and much success in 2005 and the years after that.
Thank you, Dave.